Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Willis Wit and Wisdom. My name is Eric Willis,
And I'm Bob Willis.
and together we put our minds together and try to answer some questions.
Yeah,
So,
scary.
right?
Scary, isn't it?
But today, I'd love for us to talk, Dad, about something that struck me in this past week. A friend had reached out to me and just reconnected, and she actually moved away to take care of family members in their last years of life. And so when that got me thinking, as a caregiver to someone who is terminally ill, their death is going to be imminent. But there's a grieving process that happens before the death even occurs. And
Sure is.
so kind of, I know you have some experience in that area. I would love to learn from you what's normal in a grieving process when you're actually a caregiver of someone who's still alive.
Right. In fact, there's a term called anticipatory grief, is what the label is, anticipatory grief. I've always thought, well, they're not really anticipating, they're already in it because grief is taking place. They are anticipating something on the road, but already the grief process has started because we grieve change. And caregivers are dealing with change every moment. That they're watching changes take place, and they're dealing with it step by step. In fact, Eric, there's a term I use instead of caregiver. I like to use the term caregriever because they're grieving while they're giving care. And some of the things that they're doing, they'll stuff the emotions and the feelings while they're giving that care because they don't want to, take away any hope. They want to put up a strong front to their loved one that they're caring for. So many times they'll internalize those things and not let their emotions show, and so they stuff it, and that creates more problems. But there's some very normal things that kind of parallel a grief after death. Some of the things like your moods will change while you're a caregiver. You may have a lot of highs and lows, but again, you'll try to hide it. There may be a deep sadness, and you'll try to hide it and put on a happy face. And those are very normal, but sometimes the eating and sleeping patterns change because you begin the process of being on the same schedule as the one you're caring for. So you snack when you can and you nap when you can, kind of fill it in the spaces when you can. So normal is all messed up for a caregiver. And so, they can struggle physically and emotionally and even spiritually. You can struggle during that time too, because many times, unfortunately, what happens when a person becomes a caregiver, especially in a home setting, a lot of the friends and the contacts and support system kind of drops off because they don't want to interfere or they don't know what to say, don't know what to do. And so it's very normal, especially losing concentration is very normal for a caregiver. And through our hospice years, we would always encourage caregivers to write everything down. When nurses would come in and there'd be a medication list, they'd make sure everything was written down. So if the caregiver did not have to keep it in their head, they could look, there it is, it's on a piece of paper. All I have to do is follow that. So it really helps to stay organized that way. That way the concentration level is a little more in tune when you're making a list of things rather than just try to memorize it, because we can't do it. They're caregivers are on a roller coaster of emotions, just like the friend that you mentioned. A lot of changes in her life, in her own family, and then being that caregiver, the schedule changes, the routines change, everything changes. And like I say, we grieve change.
Yeah. And the fact that she moved away from support system that was in place, stepping into an environment that is stress filled anyway, because I can't imagine, each day, each moment of every day, not knowing if this is the last moment of the day. So there's a heightened sense of wanting to be there consistently, wanting to give the best care that we can possibly give, feeling guilty for stepping away or needing to take a break or a walk around the block or even just step outside for fresh air or something.
Yeah, and that's really important too. You mentioned that it's almost self-care for the caregivers. What I found is caregivers caregivers make terrible care receivers.
Yeah.
It's hard for them to receive it themselves, to take care of themselves, to call timeout, whether it's for an hour or a day, if they can get someone to plug into that caregiving role so they can just get away, get a breath of fresh air, take a walk, whatever it might be. Even if they can't leave the home, they can go to the other end of the house. They need a hideout, a place they can get away to, that they can, listen to music. It might be a bath, it may be reading something, but just to turn off the caregiving role just for a little while for self-care, because we always know that if caregivers do not take care of themselves, they have nothing left to give to the person they love. So it's really important. There is a group, and it does not sound like your friend falls into this group, but I've come across people, and I would use the term as reluctant caregivers. They have been pushed into this mold of providing care for someone they don't even like. In fact, that was the terminology a lady used 20 years ago. We were talking, and she became a caregiver for her husband. And even though they've been married well over 45 years, she says, I don't even like him. And he's not providing care for himself. He didn't do what he was supposed to do. And now I have to take care of him. So it's like that role of reluctant caregiver. So there's dealing with a lot of guilt on that part too. Like, I'm not supposed to be like this. But the caregiver's lifestyle will change. And many times it's a forced change instead of one that's obedient out of love and servanthood.
Yeah. No, you bring up an interesting dynamic there, because it's to care for someone else requires us to lose a bit of ourselves. It's unselfish acts in order to love on and care for other people, regardless of who they are. So I could see where if there was a reluctance to care for someone, that the guilt, the emotional state of that person would be heightened, because they should on themselves. They should be this way, or I should do this, or I ought to be this way, but I'm not. Therefore, I'm a bad person.
Right. And there's another group that often is overlooked as caregivers. That would be those moms and even dads who are caring for a child. Perhaps it's a special needs child, and they're caregiving for that child, and they know they're going to be caregiver for that child for the remainder of their life. And so that's a caregiver role that often is overlooked, and yet that couple or the husband or the wife can feel like they're being cheated, like they're being robbed. It isn't a matter of love. They love the child, but it's a matter of, like you said, you have to give of yourself for someone else. You have to make some sacrifices. And that's a hard thing to do. One of the keys, Eric, is they need an opportunity to talk about those things instead of just internalize it. To talk about, how does this make you feel? And it's okay to be honest. It's a hard place to be.
Yeah. And so as caregivers and need to take care of themselves in the process, a good way to do that is write things down, journal your thoughts, your feelings, your senses, in the moment, but then also have a person or two that are on speed dial that you can talk. Even as COVID restrictions ease up, maybe have over and talk a little bit.
Right, and find a resource list. Find resources for caregivers. There's so much online for caregivers, a lot of good support for caregivers online, but you may find a caregiver support group that other people are dealing with it. I visited with a lady yesterday who heads up a group just for chronically ill caregivers, those who are providing care for someone who's chronically ill, and they gather so they can tell their stories. And you need a safe place to do that. So we need those resources, whether it's going through a hospice or going through a state health agency, to be able to find out what's available. Alzheimer's support groups, caregivers, they deal with caregivers, so they know what's available. So find that resource list and reach out.
Absolutely. So here's what I'm going to ask. Those of you who are watching that are caregivers and that you have a resource that you want to share with others, put that down in the comment section. Type the link to that. That'll help others as they read through the links and help them find a place to plug in and to get that support.
Yeah, and if you would like to address to Eric or myself, either one personally, you can send me an email, rwillis14@cox.net. If you have a question about something, rwillis14@cox.net, or you can find me on Facebook, Bob Willis with this face. Each morning I'll do something called Morning Moments. You're welcome to friend me and communicate with me on Facebook. How can they catch you, E?
Yep, reclaimleadership.org is the best way to connect with me. And you can send me an email through that website, and would love to connect with you, especially if you have these feelings of anxiety that or causing angst or conflict, or just need to process through stuff like that. I'd love to connect with you. So reclaimleadership.org is the best way to get to me.
Absolutely.
All right, Dad. Thanks so much.
All righty. Love you. Thanks, folks.
See you, folks.